a pair of standout performances, and standout not quite in the right way, against Portsmouth and Shrewsbury. Reading goalkeeper David Button is under pressure from the fan base. Let's take a look at some of those goals against Portsmouth and Shrewsbury, some of his strengths and weaknesses, talk about whether he should be with us next season. So let's start by talking about the shot distribution this season, which starts to point to a problem with Button. As you can see, centrally he's pretty good at making saves, but once we get it to his right or left side, we're looking at 20 goals conceded versus 16 saves made, or 12 goals conceded versus 20 saves made. So if you get it into a corner versus Button, it really is more likely that you're going to score, regardless of his positioning ahead of time. So here's that first goal against Lane, and this kind of speaks to that. Here we can see Button moving with his right arm down to a shot that's low to his right. There is some decent power on this, but still it's a shot you'd expect him to save. Here's an idea of the shape of a goalkeeper you might expect to see at this point, looking to get the full angle of the top part of your body down as quickly as possible to cover the ball. Whereas with Button here, we can see his upper body is kind of curving upwards and he's going more with his right hand. With Portsmouth's second goal, I think it's actually a little bit more to do with his decision making. So with this one, you can see that his right arm has actually come out to make an attempt at a save. It does get close to Tyler Binden's back, so maybe Button is expecting some sort of block, but he actually pulls back his right arm at this point rather than continuing to try and make the save. Perhaps he thinks it's going wide. Whatever the case is, he's made the wrong decision here. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. But let's talk about some of his strengths. Let's give him his flowers. What is he good at? Why was he brought in? Sweeping is probably the reason. You'll see on his stats and certainly on his style chart that sweeping is something that he does more than most goalkeepers. He's in the top 20th percentile for this. And his high positioning and passing and build-up is good. He can often get in between the two centre backs to widen out that formation and build up a little bit. He does tend to hit long under pressure, though. If you do tend to close him down, he's going to hit long. But you can see in these pass attempts versus Port Vale that he's getting pretty far up and out of his box at times. He's also pretty good at reflex and reaction saves close to his body. Most of his best saves have been from extremely close range. You're going to see these as the result of set pieces, but often set pieces that he hasn't come to claim the first time. But Cheltenham and Fleetwood are good examples of times when he's made a lot of close reflex saves. Against Cheltenham, he conceded just 2 goals versus 3.6 expected conceded goals. So really, that one's an example of somewhere where he's used his strengths to get Reading a good result. We can see here against Fleetwood as well. Here's a shot coming in the 51st minute with 0.79 expected goals on target. So after that shot's been hit, we're expecting that to go in almost 80% of the time. Button's able to make a save, pushes it up and over his bar. But he's not going far again, is he here? This is another central shot. Obviously, it is a good save, but it's reflexes. It's not necessarily athleticism and pushing your body. And I think that's something that we see with Button as an issue. So that makes shot stopping an issue. Button does seem to struggle, as we suggested, whenever the ball goes into his right or left corner, and strikers do appear to be targeting his right side. We're seeing quite a lot of shots going down there. Now, especially from long range, Button's poor at shot stopping with rebound management. So we can see an example here against Port Vale. This shot comes in from the outside of the box. It's a relatively weak shot, and it's kind of blocked, kind of deflected a little bit by Mbenge here, and sort of bounces towards Button. So it's not necessarily moving faster or moving in a more difficult way because of the deflection. It's instead sort of slowing down. But you can see here, Button's feet positioning has kind of made it so that he's going to have to get really stretching across to his right. And with that, he's not going to be able to attempt to catch. And he pushes this straight into the path of Mighton over here on the left. The only reason that this doesn't become a more dangerous shot is because Mighton whiffs at it. But because of that ball control, because of that rebound control, Reading are conceding a second more dangerous chance from this. Here's another kind of weak goal from a shot-stopping perspective. This is the Shipley goal versus Shrewsbury. Of course, this was deflected slightly off Kelvin's back. But again, you can see that the expected goals on target for this is just 0.1. That means we only expect this one to go in 10% of the time, and it is leaving Shipley's boot from outside of the area. So Button has had a while to track this as it comes across from a corner. But here you can see, again, his feet are just a little bit placed too far to the left here, and he hasn't got himself set in the right position. He's at a stretch, and he actually pushes this further into the net to make it look like it's even further across. If we take a look back at this shot graph here, we can see it's not particularly far into the right-hand side. Button has just kind of shifted his feet in the incorrect direction and not being able to make that save. Let's talk about another weakness. Now, of course, crossing and claiming is something that's really important to cutting out a lot of attacks before they can really start, cutting out second balls. And Button does struggle with this. He often doesn't come out of his 6-yard box, but when he does, he can run into issues like this, which caused the fourth goal against Portsmouth. You could definitely argue here that the center back is jumping into Button, but if you watch this clip back, you can see that he's not actually looking back at him. He's watching the flight of the ball the whole way. The goalkeeper, with his eyes on the player and the ball at the same time, needs to be aware of what's coming towards him and needs to angle his jump accordingly. So Button will often delay situations long enough to put him into bad situations. And I do think, again, that confidence in cross-claiming is causing some of that hesitation, but it may well also be exacerbated by communication issues. Here's an example of this. This is my least favorite goal all season that Reading have conceded. Here, the ball reaches the 6-yard box at chest height. So it's going to drop right around here and it's going to come at chest height. So presumably that means if Button was to move forward here, he would be able to catch it as a high claim rather than having to wait for it to drop into his 6-yard box. Instead, he lets it come. He doesn't communicate properly with his center backs who are tracking back, and he's then backtracking towards his own net as the ball arrives. If you're backtracking, it's incredibly hard to make a save and also get the forward momentum to push that ball out, make sure that it's not going to end up in the back of the net anyway from a weak hand. As it turns out, it doesn't matter because with that backtracking, that leaves Button's feet in a bad position and he's out of position when that shot comes in and goes across to the right. So here you can see how delaying that decision, whether that's through communication, communicating to his defenders what he wants, or whether it's just through the confidence to claim the cross itself, this decision making is causing us to concede goals. But why is all of this important? Should Reading just be playing better in front of David Button? Is David Button really the worst thing that's going on with Reading this season? The issue is momentum. For me, when you're looking at these momentum charts from some of these recent games, and Shrewsbury's a great example, Reading are actually playing some really nice stuff and having great momentum in games. And yes, they should be scoring more, but if you take a hit in terms of conceding a goal, that's really going to put you back and mean that you're kind of working back against situations, working in unfavorable game states, rather than being able to just push on and win a game in a more conventional manner. So let's finish this up by looking at the stats today. So Button's faced 129 shots and has a save percentage of 64% right now. He's at expected goals on target faced of 43.57 and conceded 49 goals. That puts him more than 5 goals behind his expected goals conceded so far this season. This means that Button's letting in more goals than we would expect. Over the course of maybe 5 to 10 games, we could put this down to an anomaly or form, but over the course of 35 games, you've got to start to wonder if that's more on the goalkeeper himself. Let's just take a look finally at the stats versus other League One keepers, because of course there could be an argument that this is the kind of goalkeeping we can expect now that we've been relegated down into League One. Unfortunately, that doesn't appear to be the case. We can see that Button's conceded 1.45 goals against per 90 for 20th in League One. He's got the 22nd rated save percentage in League One. His shots on target against, admittedly, are 7th in League One, so he is seeing a lot of shots. But Reading's expected goals minus goals conceded is 0.874. That's good for 22nd in League One, means that we're conceding far more often than you would expect. This is an issue that does point to other things, such as the defense, but as we just saw, Button's 5 goals behind his numbers, so more than 50% of this is being contributed to by the goalkeeping issues. So look, in conclusion, it was always going to be difficult to bring in a good goalkeeper this season, and it does look like we went with a goalkeeper who could fit our play style as much as make good saves. It hasn't quite worked out in the shot-stopping department, though, and I would say if we're going to stay in League One and progress next season, it's probably time to move on from David Button in the summer.